Hey everyone, Tony D and Little Jones asleep in the other room. And we're going to talk about, do a hot take, remembering the 9/11 conspiracy theories. Smash like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. Please check out my books, link in the description. Wokistan, a novel, political satire, and of course the Pineys, horror comedies, books 1, 2, 3, and 4, available at Amazon, ebook, trade paperback, Kindle. Unlimited is free. Now, September 11th. I was never a believer in the conspiracy theories around September 11th. You know, that they say, well, the buildings couldn't have collapsed on their own. I think there's a perfectly logical explanation of why the buildings collapsed. Because they were built in New York in the 1970s. And during that time, the mafia was at its peak. They were at their peak in the 70s. And one of the things the mafia was deeply involved with were unions and construction. And when they built the Twin Towers and the surrounding buildings, the mafia had their hand in that pot. And they just basically end up costing construction companies and big projects like that lots of money. They steal stuff, they swap out things. So here's my theory. And I was just watching. We Are Change has one of the truthers on. If you want to see him, and they played a clip from a Donald Trump interview where he talks about how strong the building was, how it survived an initial attempt to bring it down. I think in the late '90s, and he talked about just the massive steel, and you wouldn't think it would come down, and blah 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 blah. No, I'm sure it wouldn't, unless either through the mafia or just through the builders' cheapness, that they skimped on some of the steel somewhere. That somewhere in the building they said, it's going to be fine. And it probably would have been fine if a bunch of planes hadn't hit them, but they did, uh, causing fires. And, possibly the shoddy construction had something to do with the collapse. That's my theory. And I can speak to this a little bit. I mean, look, I had a cousin who I didn't really know. I have a very large extended family, so one of my distant cousins was actually in the one of the buildings. He died on September 11th. A lot of people locally in Jersey had relatives or knew someone. I didn't know him at all, and I couldn't even tell you his name. And he was just a kid on an internship there, and he's caught in a building, wrong place, wrong time, and it's very tragic. But it at the time, the guy we had responding was George W. Bush, who just used it for his own, purposes to gin up a war in Iraq, which had nothing to do with it. Did he blow up? But I don't believe he blew up buildings around the country in order to gin up a war. I don't think you had to do that. I mean, they were already doing it, saying that Saddam was going to send remote controlled drones filled with anthrax. They'd already done it. They'd already ginned up people about the anthrax scare right before it. A lot of people forget about that because it happened right before. And in fact, one of the post offices that got hit with anthrax was right near me here in South Jersey. One that I frequented it on occasion back when we were still using mail. So, I believe that the U.S. government plotted all this? There's even one theory where, the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania, instead of crashing, it landed, and all the people were, kidnapped essentially by the U.S. government and ushered away somewhere, which I don't believe that either. They, this happened, is what it boils down to. I mean, there was no security at the airport prior to 9/11, really. And certain airports, You could just walk on. There was barely any security, and that's where they got in. They got in Maine in these tiny airports, and there were tiny airports all around the country. Um, Atlantic City had a pretty small airport, and there was another one near me. I think it was in Pomona, and there was nothing. There's nothing there. Prior to September 11th, it was nothing. There was no real security there. They didn't really check things because there was no need to. Nobody blew up planes. I mean, people had hijacked them, but that went out of vogue, and apparently we didn't need security then. But the airports did their own security. Now we got the TSA, which I still contend is a total joke and completely useless, but worse than useless. It gives you a false sense of security and costs a ton of money. But that's another video. And so now we have this elaborate security system that doesn't really work. And, it's just, at least kind of some people are watching, but not really. They've done tests on the TSA and they fail almost every time. It's just that people have gotten sick of the story and moved on. That's the only reason. You're not any safer in those airplanes than you were, in August. I think it was. Maybe it was a week before. Yeah, it was the week before, because I went to Dragon Con on a plane to Atlanta. One of the planes that hit one of the towers was coming from Atlanta, going to New York. And it may have been one, I may have been on that plane prior, the week prior. And in fact, I remember being on that plane. I had taken a red eye back to Philadelphia. And this before the towers. And the cockpit was open because it was sweltering in the plane for some reason. And the door was like going boom, boom, boom. And it was the middle of the night. I was trying to sleep. And I finally said to the stewardess, hey, why don't you go up there and shut the door? It seems a little dangerous. Because my impression was, some idiot's going to get bored and walk up to the cockpit and say, hey guys, can I see you fly the plane? Whoops. And fall in on the controls and kill us all. It's probably not laid out that way, but that's what I imagined, and that's what I worried about. And it just seemed unsafe to have the door flopping, and I could look down the aisle and kind of see the pilots and outside the plane. I didn't want to see that. I wanted that door to be shut. And the stewardess was like, well, the pilots are hot. Yeah. So maybe it was the same plane. Maybe that's why the hijackers were able to get in the cockpit so quick. It was hot again because the plane didn't have a good air conditioning, and the pilots had the cockpit door open. It just seems common sense that you'd shut and lock the door. Just so some maniac who wanted to kill himself couldn't just run in there and grab the controls, right? Just seemed to me. But yeah, I mean, now the conspiracy theories are all about this and that. It's like, there's not a grand conspiracy theory. I mean, it's pretty clear that the terrorists exploited the security loopholes in the United States, and there are a lot of them. The FBI had more than enough chances to stop these guys. They got a report that the terrorists who were flagged as being suspicious guys from other countries had taken airplane lessons in Florida, and they very much wanted to learn how to fly the plane and get it up in the air, but they had no interest in learning to land it, which should have been a huge red flag, right? Like, well, you guys don't want to learn to land a plane? Nah, you can skip that part. Let's get out of here. I don't know why they wouldn't just go through the motions, not to be suspicious, but that apparently was the report, and one of many that went ignored. Nobody got fired for September 11th. To this day, no one's been fired. None of the airport people in Maine got fired. None of the FBI who ignored these reports got fired. Certainly no one in government ever gets fired. So, it's not that there wasn't a cover-up. There's always a cover-up, because when it comes to government, and they're at fault, all they do is cover up. That's 90% of what they do, is they further their existence, whatever they are, whether it's the FBI or The CIA, they were certainly partially responsible for monitoring these things. But I will tell you one story which Justin Raimondo used to talk about all the time, which isn't a conspiracy theory, although some people call it one. It's about the Israeli art students who were eventually deported. And the story goes, and this is true, there was a group of Israeli art students who set up shop in Fort Lee, in a park in Fort Lee, and they had cameras going, and they were watching the towers. And when the planes hit, they cheered, supposedly. Now, that last part, I'm not sure if it was confirmed. But what is confirmed is they got stopped by police as they were going into the city after the towers were hit. I don't think they had fallen yet. And completely unsolicited, they stopped. They rolled down the window, and the Fort Lee cop, or whoever it was, the bridge cop, went up to the art students, and totally unsolicited, the driver turned and said to the cop, "We are all Israelis now." And the working theory behind who these guys were is that they were agents of the Mossad. Their cover was Israeli art students. And it's not that they helped plan it. They would not do that. Israel would not do that. The Mossad certainly wouldn't. But what they probably were doing is they were probably monitoring this situation. They may have suspected or even known that the attack was going to happen, but no one's really sure. And the reason they said that is because it was known that the Israelis wanted certain enemies in the Middle East gone. They actually had a plan for it called a clean break. And the plan called for them to go after all their enemies in the Middle East. Well, several people talked about the plan, several big muckety-mucks, some in Israel and some within our own government, including Donald Rumsfeld and Douglas Feith. And they came to the conclusion that, well, Israel just didn't have enough people and armies and planes to conquer all these countries around it and put them out of commission. But the U.S. did. So the scheme allegedly was modified to hopefully draw the United States in to fight this war, which basically is what happened. Which is partly why the Iraq War happened, because even though it was pretty well known that these guys trained in Afghanistan, they attacked Iraq because there were better targets. There weren't really targets in Afghanistan. And really, Afghanistan was a useless country to invade anyway, because all they did was train there. They didn't live there, really. I mean, they lived in the Pashtun Mountains, which were kind of between Pakistan and Afghanistan, but, it didn't require you to invade the entire country. It just required for you to go in there with a bunch of CIA guys and, SEAL Team 6 or whatever, and get in there and find him. Find Osama and the various guys and either kill him or bring him to justice. So, a lot of the war was just totally pointless. But, it is possible that in the years to come, we will finally learn, these guys knew, or they at least suspected that something was going to happen, because maybe they were just sitting across the park, monitoring the situation because they suspected it might happen eventually. Not that they even could stop it, even if they had warned us. But maybe they did. Who knows? That would be the true cover-up if the Israelis said, hey, you got a bunch of Al-Qaeda guys, they may do X, Y, and Z, and we just went, yeah, whatever. Or nobody, forwarded the information. We may find that out at a later date. But these other conspiracy theories have always been very nutty. When you look for grand cabal conspiracy theory, it always comes back to one thing: the complete incompetence of a massive government like the United States. I mean, it's just incompetent because it's too big and unwieldy to actually be a functional system on every level. It's just the bigger the government is, the more stuff is going to fall through the cracks. And, corruption and things like that, that's going to hurt it too. So, yeah, I mean, September 11th, and then, you look at what they did to the first responders, which always outraged me. Congress couldn't just pass one of their many, many multi-million-dollar bills to make sure that all the first responders got the medical care they needed for free. I think it's an outrage that Jon Stewart had to press Congress for years and years and years for that. I think they deserved it. And certainly if you're going to spend all kinds of other money, you could spend this money. But, it's a sad day. And back in the day, 9/11, it's like the Family Guy episode. It's like 9/11, yay! It was a bit of an obsession with the country for a long time. As anti-American as some of the people in this country now, some of the young people are now, they were pro-American for September 11th. So, a lot of the Antifa stuff, I sometimes consider it, this is sort of the reaction. This is sort of the pendulum swinging side to side, went all the way to crazy jingoistic patriotism, which went too far in my view, and now it's swung all the way the other way, like people openly chanting death to America and doing all sorts of horrible things. Why can't we just have a happy medium? Why, back in the Bush era, I was like, I'm really sick of this, I'm fine with the troops, but I don't think we should worship the ground they walk upon. They do mess up and do bad things and should be criticized when they do, and they shouldn't be put in harm's way for pointless wars and yada, yada, yada. And then now I find myself defending cops and EMTs and, things that Trump has done. It's like a complete opposite of what I have to defend now, because it's gone so far the other way with people saying, oh, we're all racist and terrible human beings. Can't we just find a happy medium? I hope someday we can.